relative to permits of new landfills, HB 1454, and we'll hear from the prime sponsor. Representative, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the Environment and Natural Resources Committee. I'm Representative Edith Tucker, COAS 5, representing Whitefield, Jefferson, Carroll, and Randolph. HB 1454 addresses one basic and indisputable fact. There are sensible places to site landfills, and there are totally inappropriate places to site them. We're not here to debate the future need for landfills, but only where they can appropriately be sited. But I do think the next landfill in New Hampshire would be sited sooner if applicants and DES could focus, respectively, on completing and reviewing only applications at sensible sites. That's what HB 1454 is designed to do. Focus limited public and private sector resources on appropriate sites. This bill changes the site's landfill siting requirements, helping applicants understand what DES will be looking for first. Groundwater can move as slowly as 1 foot per year in soils with a high clay content and/or in bedrock that's not full of fractures. It is appropriate and safe to locate a landfill where groundwater flows very, very slowly toward a lake or river. In contrast, groundwater can move as quickly as 50 feet per day in soils high in gravel or sand content and in fractured rock. It's inappropriate and dangerous to build a landfill where groundwater speeds away towards a lake or river. By far the most serious potential hazard of any landfill is the essentially irreversible danger to the water we drink and that wildlife lives in and around, and the surface waters we all enjoy, on which our tourism industry depends. Much of the science in this bill reflects the knowledge and research of Dr. Adam Finkel, a Dalton resident and former member of the EPA Science Advisory Board and OSHA's chief scientist in both the Clinton and George W. Bush administrations. He's here with me and can answer any technical questions you may have. This bill also very much reflects the work of a bipartisan group of citizens and legislators, including District 1 Senator Aaron Hennessy of Littleton, who came together early last fall to address the concerns of those lawmakers who could not support HB 177 last year. That earlier bill, passed by the House but not the Senate, would have prohibited a new landfill within a fixed 2-mile distance of any New Hampshire state park. HB 1454, which last month passed the House in a definitive and bipartisan voice vote, is a more scientific and flexible, site-specific way to replace the current 200-foot, one-size-fits-all setback from water bodies that DES has had in its administrative code since 1991. This setback has no defenders. It's simply a problem that can and should be fixed by the legislature as soon as possible. This bill would ensure that the state's next new landfill will not be located within a few weeks or months' flow of any of our state's precious lakes or rivers, potentially saving tens or hundreds of millions of dollars in future remediation expenses. I'm sure I don't need to remind you that that's the kind of money we're talking about spending to fix pollution problems in waters elsewhere in the state. That's because all landfills will leak. This is not just the conclusion that the EPA reached in the 1990s, but one it continues to believe today, supported by new peer-reviewed studies. Other failures, such as leachate spills, can take place at any time. The years to cause harm concept is not new. Since 1993, the EPA has made the formulas and software freely available to find the calculated fixed radius from drinking water wells within which new industrial facilities ought not to be located. And at least 5 other states already use time of travel setbacks from landfills and other pollution sources. The state of Maine's DEP requires a 6-year setback based on the travel time of groundwater. Dr. Finkel recently emailed a senior manager in Maine's Waste Management Division to ask what the state's experience has been over the last 15 years that this has been in effect with that provision, worrying about years of travel of that window. The manager replied, regarding the success of Maine's implementation of time of travel calculations and subsequent contaminant transport analysis. She didn't write this for oral speech, so I'll just start again. Regarding the success of Maine's implementation of time of travel calculations and subsequent contaminant transport analyses, I'm not aware of any concerns expressed about the use of this methodology. Maine continues to be successful in siting and developing new solid waste landfills. The key provisions in HB 1454 clearly work elsewhere, and it's time we allow them to work here in the Granite State. I'd be happy to answer any non-technical questions. I apologize that I see in my testimony I had the wrong name for your committee. I'm embarrassed to see I didn't correct that.
That's okay. We appreciate your testimony, and it's always a tough thing to testify. I don't like doing it myself, so. But thank you very much for your testimony. Questions from the committee? Senator Gray.
Line 14, page 1, independent hydrologist. Usually what I would see in those kind of things is from an approved list from the department or something else. You have not included that in there.
That would be a good idea. That sounds reasonable.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I do have a question. Didn't we recently just pass the bill from the Senate allowing the department to have an independent hydrologist? I think it was Senator Kevin Kavanaugh's bill. I think, is that, we did pass a bill specifically allowing.
And is it, but it isn't yet in law.
Not yet. No, we're counting on you to pass that.
I'm on Ways and Means. You don't want to deal with me.
Okay. All right. It just addressing that particular
Right.
issue.
I think that I think we can all look back now and see that we've perhaps underfunded DES, and they do need more specialists. And I think we're all in favor of that. What we don't like is, to spend more money in New Hampshire than we have to. So it's a balancing act, isn't it?
It is. But there is something on your way, so you might just.
I will keep my eye out for it and sign on to it. Thank you.
Yeah, Senator. That's from Senator Kavanaugh. Any other non-technical questions? We really appreciate you.
And I can give some copies of this testimony, but if you could just cross out and correct my error on the name of the committee,
That's
I'd be
fine.
appreciative.
Thank you. So I'm going to call the representatives first because I know your time is valuable. So Representative Thomas, are you here? Representative Egan. Only because, and they're co-sponsors, so that's why I'm putting them at the front of the line.
He was just outside, Representative Thompson.
Okay. Representative Egan. Representative Murner. Oh. Okay, we got a customer. All right.
Yes, first in line. Good morning. For the record, I'm Timothy Egan, representative for Grafton District 2 of the towns of Sugar Hill, Franconia, Lisbon, Lyman, Monroe. I serve on the committees for Fish and Game and Marine Resources, as well as Resources, Recreation, and Development. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, esteemed senators, for making time for me this morning. I'll try to be brief, as we all appreciate in testimony. I'm here to speak in support of House Bill 1454 because this bill establishes a formula for determining the distance at which a new landfill shall be located from a perennial river, lake, or coastal water. And I want to emphasize that waste and waste management, as well as the preservation of clean water, is a statewide issue, which is why I became involved in this topic. And what seems to be a local issue for Coos County affects also Grafton County. In representing Grafton 2, Sugar Hill and Franconia are home to the Cooley-Jericho Trail, Cannon Mountain, Franconia Notch State Park. I have concerns knowing that while a proposed landfill could be over 12 miles away, groundwater contamination that can impact the Gale River, Echo Lake, and the Ammonoosuc River, which I think can harm residents' drinking water, visitors that are enjoying the swimming, fishing, and boating, and the irrigation of area organic farms. Rather than talk to you about the theoretical, I'd like the committee to hear a little bit about some examples of what we call, or we're referring to as years to cause harm concept that we're seeing in Coos County. Per the expertise and the advice of the aforementioned Dr. Adam Finkel, the application that's pending at the DES for the expansion of the existing landfill at Mount Carberry near Berlin provides data showing that contaminated groundwater from that site would take 60 to 150 years to reach a tributary like the Androscoggin River. The velocity that was found to be about 50 feet per year there, and it's located in appropriate soils and bedrock. In sharp contrast, the applicant that is pending, but still incomplete application to install a landfill in Dalton is already estimated the groundwater flows at 9.5 feet per day or faster at that site. If the setback that's now listed in the DES's administrative code remains at 200 feet from a surface water body, then the agency might have only as few as 21 days at a site like this to notice and respond to a leak at this site's groundwater flows because it flows so quickly towards the Ammonoosuc River. I don't think that's an acceptable issue to force the people living or visiting New Hampshire to be susceptible to this type of environmental danger that could occur in just 3 weeks. Therefore, the setback from a proposed landfill to such a water body should be sufficient to prevent groundwater contamination by a leak, a spill, or other failure from reaching a water body before remedial action can be implemented. The protection of perennial rivers, lakes, coastal waters in New Hampshire from contamination is in the public interest. It's of the interest of the entire state. We see that in our tourism and in our lifestyle and the aforementioned in many articles, the quality of life in New Hampshire. And that's something that I'm here to testify to try and help protect. I think House Bill 1454 can help protect our environment, its economy, and its residents, our residents. So I appreciate you making time for me this morning. If you have any questions, again, I'll speak big picture, and if there are technical questions, the fine Dr. Adam Finkel is here to help us.
Thank you, Representative. Questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your time.
Representative Thomas? We have 5 bills today, and so I will give the majority of the time to the representatives to speak on behalf of these bills, but I think we're going to have to limit testimony to about 3 minutes per person after that because we have a lot of people wishing to speak, and to be fair to the other hearings, we're going to have to limit that. But the representatives, you have all the time you need.
I won't take all that much time, Senator. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and Senators. House Bill 1454 is a follow-up to a bill that we produced last year, which was HB 177. The House virtually unanimously passed that bill, 333 to 33 in the end. And what we've come back with this year are some technical changes in it to make it more palatable to the industry as well as DES. And I think it makes one simple change, and it's to help protect New Hampshire's waters, lakes, streams, rivers. We can contaminate the soil and remediate it. We can put filters in the stacks of industrial processes that will remediate those contaminants. But once we contaminate the water,
we're done. We've done all that we can do to damage the planet once the water's gone. It's a staple of life. I just heard 2 days ago on a survival show that the average person could live 3 days without a clean supply of water. They're already required, the developers are already required to determine the speed of the groundwater, the speed that the groundwater moves on a proposed site. And it instructs the state environmental services not to grant a permit to any new location where contaminated water could flow from the site to its surface water within 5 years. This 5-year distance of travel setback would allow a landfill operator to detect and begin remediation of the spill or leak before it reaches surface water. House Bill 177, the forerunner of this new and more science-based bill, passed the House during the last session, as I stated, although it did not pass the Senate. The House vote was a clear sign that the state needs new rules to deal with this important environmental issue, water pollution. I would think that the St. Gobain debacle would have taught us something about water pollution in our state and what it would cost, potentially what it will cost overall. Most of us don't think very often about groundwater, but because of HB 1454 updates to the criteria that DES need to use when siting new landfills, it's important to recognize that groundwater is the source of much of the drinking water for all on which we all depend. It's always on the move, flowing with gravity and pressure to take it. I have to excuse me, I don't think that's right. Pressure take it. Modern landfills have a plastic and other liners underneath them, but unfortunately these will ultimately fail some 30 to 50 years later. I personally asked an official of the EPA at one point in a meeting in Boston. I said, "What are you going to do with the garbage when the liners start to leak?" And she said, "Well, that's not a problem." I said, "Well, the liners state right on them when you unroll them that they're good for 30 years. And she said, "Well, none of us will be here in 30 years, so we'll let them worry about that," which gives you some idea of the concern of the federal government for this problem. In some areas, groundwater at a specific site flows very, very slowly away from the landfill, perhaps as slowly as a foot a year, where the soil is largely made of clay and there are only a few cracks in the bedrock. At other sites, unfortunately, the groundwater can flow away from the site at speeds as fast as 10 feet per day, especially where the soil is full of sand and gravel and the bedrock is full of cracks. In this situation, the current 200-foot setback would only allow a 20-day window before a leak or spill could contaminate a nearby water body. The leak may not even be detected before it's started to do irreparable damage. This illustrates the importance of using a proposed 5-year distance of travel setback. So the best way to protect the rivers, lakes, and coastal areas that are near a landfill are to make sure that every new one is sited where groundwater flows slowly. If you give me just a second, I think I'm at the point where I need my glasses. The faster groundwater moves, the farther away it must be put from a landfill, from any lake or river. Current law in New Hampshire allows the new landfill to be built as close as 200 feet from a lake or river, but groundwater can travel 200-foot distance in as little as 3 weeks. HB 1454 will not reduce the ability of a private company or public authorities to build new landfills in our state when needed. It will just help to ensure none are sited in the more damaging locations. For example, when the Mount Carberry landfill near Berlin got permission to expand about 10 years ago, its operator reported to DES that the groundwater there would take between 60 and 150 years for any polluted groundwater to reach even a tributary of the Androscoggin River. Granite State citizens all over the state want to preserve the health of their families and the environment, its wildlife, and their recreational tourist economy, and to avoid spending tens of millions of dollars, and I would amend that to say probably billions of dollars, in an attempt to remedy the pollution problems that never should have happened in the beginning. I want to thank you very much for your time, and I'll take any questions that you have.
Thank you, Representative. Questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you very much, and thank you for your time. All right.
Nobody from GES.
Oh, yeah, I'm going to do the reps first.
We don't have any.
Yeah. All right. Let's see. Tucker. Sure. Representative Bixby. I think you're in here somewhere. I thought I saw your name.
I think first page, it's hard to say which one is the first one anymore, I suppose.
There you are. Gotcha.
So, thank you, members of the committee, for hearing my testimony. For the record, I'm Representative Peter Bixby from Dover, New Hampshire, and I am the ranking member of the House Environment and Agriculture Committee. So when HB 1454 came to ENA, we felt the bill had merit, but we felt that it also needed some amendment. So in subcommittee, we determined that the critical aspect of the bill was updating the setback distance of new landfills from perennial water bodies. The current distance is set in Environmental Rule ENVSW 80404 as 200 feet. That section also requires that, quote, the potential release of contaminants to surface waters be prevented, can be prevented, attenuated, or otherwise remediated. And as you've heard from previous testimony, in some situations like Mount Carberry, the hydrogeological conditions are such that 200 feet actually would work. But in other situations, you might have as little as 21 days before a potential leak reached a water body within 200 feet. So what we chose to do in the committee is follow the recommendation of doing a time of travel distance so that any potential spill would be able to be recognized and remediation begun within a 5-year window. So in order to calculate that 5-year window, what we established a requirement to do a sufficient number of a representative number of test wells around the prospective site, and use the hydrogeological measurement of the groundwater flow both in the over layer or the upper level of the soil and also in the bedrock layer to come up with the maximum seepage velocity, which is the fastest rate of travel of groundwater away from that site. And keep in mind that the groundwater is always flowing from in any soil or any bedrock. There's always some level of groundwater flow, and at that point of measurement it's basically clean groundwater because nothing's been contaminated. But by getting that measurement before you start at the very beginning of the permitting process, you can assess whether that flow rate is going to be able to reach a water body within a certain number of years by simply measuring that flow rate in feet per year and then multiplying by 5 years. You get how far that would travel in 5 years. So for instance, if you had a flow rate of 1 foot per year, then it would flow 5 feet in 5 years, and that's not a very big issue. If you have a flow rate of 1,000 feet per year, then you would then you're talking about having a 5-year distance of 5,000 feet, which is a substantially greater distance. So what our amendment to the bill as introduced does is it basically just sets that standard in, replaces the current standard of 200 feet with a standard of a minimum of 200 feet, but if that flow rate distance is greater, then that flow rate distance calculated based on that the measurement made at the site multiplied by 5 years. And I have provided you with an amendment because when we had the bill drafted, OLS inadvertently left out the units for the measurements. And what the amendment that I provided for you, which is number 22-1552H, which you would probably have to turn into a Senate amendment, but OLS has that language.
1552H or 1052H?
It's 1052H.
You're all set.
Okay. So what this amendment does is it simply adds the units in of maximum seepage velocity shall be measured in feet per year, and the distance of travel is multiplying that by 5 years. So it simply adds in those units, and it makes no other change to the language of the bill that you have before you. That's basically the way that this works. It is simply changing an existing number in law to a new way of coming up with that number. So you may have heard, or you may yet hear, that this bill is spot zoning. It's really not. It is simply taking something that is a number that is currently in law and coming up with a new way of calculating that number to make sure that failures can be detected and remediated before water bodies are damaged. And it is simply good engineering practice to build in appropriate margins of errors. And you may also hear that DES does a good job in establishing appropriate policies and the legislature should not interfere. As we all know, administrative departments are charged with executing policies that the legislature sets forth. And it is our duty as legislators to give the executive branch clarity in the policies they need to execute. This bill is simply a clarification. So I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Representative Bixby. You always do your homework. Senator Waters.
Yeah, so thank you, Representative Bixby. Just to clarify, so the one thing that this amendment does is adds that phrase, that sentence, maximum seepage velocity shall be measured in feet per year.
Yes, it adds that phrase, and in the following, in paragraph number 2, it also adds multiplied by 5 years rather than simply multiplied by 5. And basic algebra, you want to make sure that the units multiply out correctly.
Thank you.
Any further questions from the committee? Senator Gaida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So how accurate would the flow rate be? And how many wells and so forth, given the different substrata and so forth that's involved in geology? How accurate would it be to just take a 5-year average of the, of the flow rate?
Okay, so it's not a 5-year average. It's what the measurement. I'm pretty sure that Dr. Finkel can probably give you more details on this, but I can give you a sort of a quick version of it, which is that when on any given site, you can a hydrogeologist can measure the rate of flow of groundwater at various different depths. And that rate of flow can be expressed in feet per year. So, and there is some minor variation depending on season or weather conditions, whether we're in a drought or whether we're in So there might be minor variations, but the main determinant of the flow rate is the structure of the soil and the structure of the underlying bedrock. So you might have, it might be 9.9 feet per year rather than 10 feet per year, or some variation on that level is not going, so that once you multiply that by 5, you're going to end up with a few feet variation. But if you're talking about the difference between 1 foot per year and 1,000 feet per year, then the variation in the measurement is going to be insignificant. You're trying to figure out what a good safety margin is so that you have 5 years to deal with a problem that happens. And we hope that engineering works out wonderfully, and that they get everything right, and there's never a spill and there's never a leak. And we know that engineers also built the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. So therefore we should build in some degree of margin of error. So that's the point of this measurement, and it should be sufficient to give us a good margin of error.
Senator Gray.
I want you to comment on this. The flow rate in a particular piece that is sandy gravel soil may be very high, and if you use that and multiplied it by 5, but by going out that 5, I may have passed an area of clay, an area of other soils, and it seems that to say I'm going to multiply a number by 5 and get it doesn't take into consideration the science, of the soils that I would be including in that.
Yes, I understand the concern. One aspect of this is that for the site, the bill requires that it be a representative sample, which means that for a small site it might be only 2 or 3 wells. For a much larger site, there may be 10 or 20, 30 test wells. It kind of depends on the size of the site and what DES would determine as being an appropriate representative sample. That covers the area within the site. Outside the site, yes, you're right. We cannot assume that the entire area around, say, 1 mile or 2 or 5 mile perimeter around a site necessarily has the same soil type. However, in order to get samples for that entire area, it would require having permission from the landowners around that site to have the wells dug on their property. Those which we do not feel that, in our committee, we did not feel that we had that it was appropriate, given in terms of property rights, to insist that there be wells dug on on properties that were not that did not belong to the owner of the site area. So yes, there is a certain degree of approximation there, but this is the best approximation we can get within the limitations of property rights. And the other thing is that owners in the abutting areas could give their own permission to have test wells done on their property, and they could contact DES to arrange that to happen.
Would properties, say, in a higher elevation be exempt from a soil test, seeing, water flows downhill?
That is, well, if you're in a higher elevation, so in other words, if...
Chair? Yep. You might better have that, the scientists come up, because we're talking about subsurface water and not surface water.
Right. So
yeah, a lot of
I think Dr. Finkel could probably answer that more effectively than I could.
And we do have a lot more speakers on this, so
okay. And I'm hoping that you'll be free in time to come visit our committee at 11 or 11:20 to.
I think I want
no,
to.
no, it's 11. We have the CSG at 10.
At 10. Sorry about that.
So we're looking forward to seeing you there.
All right. Thank you very much for your testimony. We have another state rep. Masmilla? You want to cut? Go ahead. Representative?
Everybody's already spoken, I don't need to say too much. I'll just stand out some of the testimony because I'm not going to speak on it. Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
Good morning.
For the record, I'm Representative Myrna from COAS 7. I represent, as I gave you the spiel the other day, 12 towns in the North Country and the towns that are part of this project. As far as the bill's gone, quickly to say that I had a lot of things going on a couple of months ago when they were working on the bill, personal things going on. So I just got to say hats off to the people who did a lot of work on this bill. I think they got it right. It's also been vetted by the director, Mike Winsett, from the State Department of Environmental Services, that has eliminated sections that have been concerns for him and his staff members. So I think it's a good bill. And you've heard a lot of stuff. I don't want to go on, but I want to be on the record for that I'm in support of this bill.
Thank you, Representative. Questions from the committee? I know you're busy. Thank you very much.
I got to race the science and technology.
Treat me nice. All right, I treat you nice. Okay. Masmilla, Representative?
I just have a comment. I'd like
We have to have you on the record.
Good morning. I was going to use my teacher voice, but I guess I can come up here. I'm Representative Linda Massimilian. I represent Grafton 1. And my comment is with DES updating their solid waste policy, House Bill 1454 is relevant, and I hope you will vote ought to pass. Thank you.
Right to the point. We thank you. Appreciate it. We like that. And let's see here. Representative Murray, did you want to speak? Okay.
Thank you, honorable colleagues. My name is Representative Megan Murray. For the record, I represent the town of Amherst, Hillsborough District 22. I had the distinct honor of chairing the subcommittee work session in House Environment and Agriculture, where we did work very closely and collaboratively to develop a proactive metric for consideration in the siting of landfills. It passed out of our committee and then went to a vote on the full House floor, where it passed on a voice vote. And the subcommittee felt that there is an absolute need for the metric that takes a proactive rather than reactive approach when it comes to perennial bodies of water. And with that, I will also say that we are keenly aware in the state that not only are we struggling with water contamination from certain pollution sources, but it's affecting communities throughout the Granite State. And I feel that, as well as many other committee members, that it is absolutely pertinent to our tourism industry as well as to the residents of New Hampshire to make sure that in perpetuity we are protecting our water sources so that our residents, our children can play, eat, drink, fish from the water sources that we have. And with that, I don't want to belabor the point, but we feel that this is, and in agreement with Representative Bixby, that the amendment just clarifies a few things. I'm in full support of it, so thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Questions from the committee? Senator Waters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Representative. And it's a little awkward because we don't have Mike Wimsatt here, and I don't see that we have the scientist signed up to testify.
Dr. Finkel?
Finkel, yeah, he's up here.
Oh, he's up there. Okay, I'll wait then.
Okay.
Thank you. I didn't see that.
Yeah, he's number one.
No other
All
questions?
set, thanks.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Representative.
You're welcome.
So I have Representative Lone. I can't read that for some reason. Lai, another representative. Okay, yeah, I want to get the representatives in first, please. How would you pronounce that?
Oxenham.
Oxenham. Well, you're a teacher, you would be able to. I know. Okay, there you go. Representative Oxenham? Oxenham? She didn't say either way. I just wanted to give her the right of passage here. Oh, is that right? Okay. Representative, how are you?
Very well, thank
You
you.
have the
I
floor.
apologize.
No,
I
don't
was
worry about it.
just a little bit out of sight there. Thank you so much. I'll be brief. I know that your time is very valuable. The question before us is the value of net metered service.
This is,
Oh, I'm sorry, are we still on the compliance costs?
but we agree with you.
About the importance of your valuable time, absolutely.
No, about the net metering. Go
Well,
ahead.
excellent.
This has to do with the 1454 FN, the landfill.
I must apologize. I must have checked the box on the wrong bill. I did not mean to speak on the landfill.
That's fine?
Terribly important issue. I hope that you will protect our water resources in this state with everything you have, but I'm not prepared to speak to that
That's
bill.
fine. That's
Thank
all we
you.
needed. Thank you.
Net meter the water.
We'll net meter the water. That's right. Are there any other representatives who can briefly discuss their support or opposition to this bill? Seeing none, we're going to turn it over to Dr. Adam Finkel. Is it Dr. Adam?
Yep,
Okay.
thank you.
And what we're going to do is we're going to, I'm going to give you up to 5 minutes, but everybody else is going to have to be.
I don't think I'll need it.
It's just that I have a lot of people still wishing to speak, and we want to be respectful of those that are here for other bills as well. So,
I'll give you one more. I think I have my own. Hang on. Let me just make sure I have my original. Sorry. No, I don't. Sorry. Okay, sorry. Thank you. Sorry about that.
that's all right.
Very glad to be here in my new home state to support this important common sense environmental and economic win-win piece of legislation.
If you wouldn't mind telling us who you are.
Sure, I'm sorry. Adam Finkel from Dalton. So I'd appreciate if you could follow along, because I'm going to really try and rush through this in the interest of time. The first paragraph, just a preface saying I really would welcome any debate about this. I've not heard much opposition technically to the bill, but I'm going to say 9 things, rapid fire, that I believe are unimpeachably true. But if people want to discuss it, I'm at your disposal at any time. So I'll just read the summary and then just pronounce these 9 pronouncements. So for about 30 years, New Hampshire has tried to make do with a landfill siting criterion that is exactly what this committee has called unacceptable. The uniform 200-foot setback is one size fits all, despite, well, you've heard about the tremendous variation in the speed of groundwater flow. It's unprotected, it's arbitrary, and it sets in motion a siting process that wastes hundreds of thousands of dollars for the applicant and thousands of hours of DES precious staff time. This bill fixes all of that with one simple step. It asks the applicant to do their required groundwater seepage test at the beginning of the process, and it disqualifies only those few applicants who wish to build a landfill in extremely porous soil and very near one of our precious rivers or lakes. This bill is pro-landfill. It helps applicants find sensible sites which can only increase the success rate of worthy projects, and if you believe, as I don't, and Mr. Wimsatt doesn't, that there's a crisis, this bill will speed up the siting of the next landfill because DES will not be tied up in knots for years reviewing an application that should not have been presented. So here are my 9 points. Number 1, this bill is exactly what the doubters asked for when they voted against 177 last year. It protects water bodies and not state parks. It's site-specific and not one-size-fits-all. And Representative Tucker gave you a quote that I got from the state of Maine that's had great success with their 6-year setback. Number 2, it will be very easy to propose a landfill that meets the criteria of this bill in any region of the state. I've handed out a simple chart of the speeds of groundwater flow at our 3
are two unlimited operating landfills, unlimited air operating landfills, and the proposed new third landfill in a row for the North Country. And it's a simple question. Do we want the next landfill to be 3 weeks away from a lake or river, or 60 to 100 years away, as Mount Carberry already is, and the turnkey landfill is closer to that than the 3 weeks by a lot? Number 3, no promised miracle technology can substitute for sensible siting. All landfills leak, and some have a history of emergency spill events. I've handed out a one-pager that's full of new information. It's not just EPA saying this autonomically for 30 years. There are brand new studies of exhuming landfills that are modern, state-of-the-art, and they are found to be degraded. Number 4, this bill can have no effect and will have no effect on the price, quantity, or demand for landfill services. This bill is a simple statement about an obvious incompatible use. Not being able to build an athletic field with floodlights that shine onto a military base has no effect anywhere on the supply of athletic fields. Number 5, landfill siting implicates competing property rights, and the needs of the many outweigh the whims of the very few. Nobody has an entitlement to get a permit approved if it is against public policy. This bill just clarifies that certain unwise applications should be marked return to sender so they can be improved and then approved. 6, other than Mr. Wimsatt, who isn't here, nobody else in the room can tell you from experience what it's like to run a federal regulatory agency. That's been my experience. DES does not and should not resent the setting of broad policy by this legislature. Indeed, Mr. Wimsatt told the House committee and told myself and Representative Tucker on the phone several times, I'm going to quote him directly, taking a look at our setback criteria is an appropriate topic for the legislature, end quote. He worked with us on several long phone conversations to eliminate provisions of this bill that he found vexing, and he worked with us to tighten up the definitions such that he's told us he does not believe there will be any need to do rulemaking to implement this bill. All of the terminology and all of the formulae are in the bill, as short as it is, in words that mean what they say. 7, the claim by industry that DES permit language can cover up regulatory and policy mistakes is frankly hideous. A piece of paper with the words "don't pollute anything" has not worked to stop leaks and very prominent spills. I have a letter that I've handed out that I wrote to the House Environment Committee refuting the testimony from Sanborn Head, which basically just went on for 6 pages saying, but we have permits. Well, of course we have permits, but permits are only as good as the permittee. And that cannot cover up for bad law and bad policy. When I was running a federal regulatory agency, we looked to our Congress all the time to help us, and we didn't resent it, quite the contrary. We thought it was appropriate, and it helped us exercise our discretion within limits. Almost done. Number 8, as Representative Bixby said, this bill in no way constitutes spot zoning. I've handed out another short legal memo about why this is completely wrong. But in any event, the case law about Tilton is very clear that public health and welfare supersede any claims, false or true, about spot zoning. And finally, this bill protects the waters of the state for the next century and beyond. It is not aimed at one misguided project. Perhaps an applicant who's got a currently withdrawn permit will later claim that it nevertheless has an entitlement to be exempted from this bill. If so, that's a matter for the courts. But if the bill happens to be enacted too late to protect Forest Lake and the Ammonoosuc, that would be a tragedy. But the bill is still needed now, so the next company that comes along that drives by a big sand and gravel sign between a lake and a river will know that this state won't entertain a ruinous proposal for no good reason. So I'm happy to take any questions anyone has. Thank you for your time.
Questions from the committee? Senator Gray.
Your degree is in?
Environmental health science and a public policy degree.
Are you a hydrologist?
No, I'm not a card-carrying hydrologist, no, but I've worked in and around that field for 40 years.
The chairman had a question about groundwater, surface water, et cetera. If you'd like him to repeat it, I'm sure he would.
Yeah, basically, there was this concept of obviously taking test samples around within a certain radius of the proposed wherever you want to go.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, there was an issue of private property and people testing. I don't know if that's going to be a hindrance. However, if there are groundwaters or bodies of water that are say at a higher elevation, would you still have to test? If the way I understand it, the water things don't leak up; they leak down.
Well, that's actually, I mean, it's not untrue, but it's kind of a myth because the surface topography has nothing to do with the underground topography. Sure, groundwater generally flows with gravity, but the wells in our area in Forest Lake are usually 300 to 400 feet deep. So,
Forest Lake, any place.
any place, but you know, people dig their water wells sometimes very deep into bedrock. But I think I mean, I'm not saying you're missing the point because we talked about this on the House side. Yes, it is true that the footprint of the landfill could be either sandier or clayier than the donut around the landfill. And we did talk about what would it be unfair to, as I think Senator Gaida said, multiply the flow rate at the site by 5. And it could, of course, go in both directions. It could be faster when it leaves or slower when it leaves. But it's a private property problem that we thought was insurmountable, that to require the applicant to get permission to go off-site and average it over the whole traversal between the site and the water body would implicate all kinds of private property rights. And I also think that the key to this bill is the compact, streamlined nature of it. This is a first pass at a permit that allows the applicant to get a simple answer. Can you go further and spend hundreds of thousands on a 5-year process or not? So to encumber the applicant with all kinds of requirements to go off-site, to map the whole area, that seemed counter to the spirit of we wanted to give them a sort of a point of entry that would be very inexpensive and very quick.
I am legitimately confused on what
Okay.
you just said, but I'll turn it over to Senator Gaida.
Well, can I try and say one more time real quickly? So I said donut because you can imagine the footprint of the landfill is the center, and then there is a ring around it between the landfill and the water body. And that ring would have private property on it. Maybe not all the time, but generally if it's several miles away, they're going to be. So we just thought it was not appropriate to ask an applicant to get permission to average the speeds at all of these points between the site and the water body, most of which would be not their land at all.
But that, all right, I'll leave it up to Senator
Okay.
Gaida because I have to get going. I'm going to also turn it over to Senator Gaida. I have a bill to introduce. One's here, the ones that are talking.
Thank you for taking my question. I'm concerned about the property rights issue. It is a significant issue, but I can envision a scenario where a person who's opposed to a landfill that might otherwise be appropriately cited refuses to allow testing, or several people refuse to allow testing, and thereby either bias the results or prevent the accurate results from happening.
Sorry to interrupt, but I guess I'm not being clear. This bill does not require or even allow any testing on private property. It says the person who...
Precisely my point. If there's 3 layers of private property between the proposed landfill and the lake, you just stop the testing that you need to validate the flow rate.
But you don't test in the private property, period. You base the criterion on the testing at the land that you own as the applicant or the proposed applicant. You don't need and you can't ask a landowner for permission. The 5 years comes from the flow rate at the site, period.
Which may not be accurate 500 meters from that site with 2 house lots in between whose owners refuse to allow you to test.
And that is also the status quo. The permits I've read for Carberry, Turnkey, and Dalton, none of those have any testing off-site. They're all based on, and again, this is all already done. It's just done later in the process in great detail. But we're just saying move it to the first day, get the same answer, but then use that to move forward or not.
I don't disagree with the process. I disagree with the inability to accurately test the ground between the landfill, that's land that's owned, and land that might be affected by the leakage. How do you predict, without testing, where the leakage might happen, what the flow rate where that leakage is suspected to happen is going to be? You can't.
And we don't now, and that I agree with you. That's a problem. This bill just fixes the more glaring problem, which is you can put a landfill I think there's a 100-foot setback to an abutter in the code. So you can be 100 feet away from someone who has no rights at all, either now or under this bill. You're correct about that. Landowners are thwarted by these facilities, but that, no one's thought to fix that in 40 years, and we're not fixing that today.
Thank you. Let's see here. Any further questions from the committee? Senator Gray.
I do. Because it's not in testimony, could you, from your knowledge, tell us what mitigation strategies are out there in constructing a landfill that would deter the septage from traveling from the site no matter what the soils are?
Sure. So the industry, and I came into this, I was a researcher and an environmental journalist about almost 40 years ago, before the era of modern double-line landfills. So I've seen them come into play. So the industry talks about the two aspects. One is the geosynthetic liner, which is underlain below the trash, and then a compacted clay liner, which is generally, if you don't have the right soil, underneath the geosynthetic liner. So it's a double line system with interception of the leachate in between. The problem with each of those is documented everywhere. The geosynthetic liners break down sometimes over decades, but sometimes very quickly. I have a study that I've cited in the handout that says within 4 years, all of the not really the seams, but the material that holds the panels together had all cracked. So they were all gaps in the liner. And then the natural clay in a place like Carberry does retard the flow of groundwater tremendously. But the compacted clay that's brought in from elsewhere and then bulldozed into place is very, even though it's the same material, it has very different properties. So I cited one study in the short handout that says, I believe there were cracks of something like 3/4 of an inch in width all over the compacted clay layer because it's brought in from elsewhere and sort of backfilled into the area. So the data are clear. There's no such thing as an old new landfill. We have new landfills that are in the early stages of a multi-decade lifetime, but they are failing nationwide as we speak.
Please.
There is testing between the two liners that you talked about, which would also detect whether the first liner has had a minor or significant failure. Is that correct?
Correct. And again, the premise of the bill is not that it would be impossible to avert a tragedy 200 feet away. The premise is you're going to reduce the probability of ending up with an irreversible or incredibly expensive remediation if you simply back away from the water body a respectful distance. And I don't think anyone thinks 200 feet is a respectful distance in any situation.
Further question?
Where I was going with the question, Doctor, is that the amount of the leak can be significant in what I would want for that setback, and if it is a very small leak but detectable, I might make one decision, but if it is a catastrophic failure of the liner, I might make another decision.
Yeah, but the problem is once you've built the landfill, you don't get to choose whether you get a small leak or a large leak. If you put it in the wrong place, you can get either one, and of course you can get an emergency spill onto the surface as we saw last year. So the leakage is only part of the problem. There is the acute failure of management that causes acute events on the surface, which then overtops the ponds and gets into the same ecosystem. So I hear what you're saying, but you don't get to choose up front whether you're only going to have small leaks or not.
Okay, you brought in a new concept there, failure of management. You want to talk about that?
Well, I'm only saying that in addition to distance being a reasonable thing to do for the long-term lifetime of a facility that is known to have a technology that's failure-prone, there are also events that happen daily and, not every day and every week, but over the time scale of days and weeks. Spills, leaks, overtoppings, floods, these are things which occur on the surface of the ground, but which can, again, if you're in a sand and gravel pit, if you go to the ocean with your kids and dig a little hole at the shoreline, when the wave comes in, it fills the hole, and 5 seconds later, it's dry again because it's so porous that the water under gravity goes right through. So a spill on the ground becomes tomorrow's plume of contaminated groundwater.
Any further questions from members of the committee? Hearing none, thank you very much.
Thanks very much, appreciate it.
Next up, we would have Tim White. And speaking in opposition. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, committee members. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Tim White. I'm one of the hydrogeologists at Sanborn Head, responsible for managing the groundwater monitoring programs at several of the state's public and private line landfills, and I've worked in the field of hydrogeology for over 20 years. In my opinion, the bill's provisions do not represent a needed surface water protection strategy and would create an inconsistent regulatory landscape in the state. In the short time I have today, I want to summarize my written comments by touching on 2 main points regarding technical shortcomings in HB 1454. My first point is, DES's existing authority to regulate landfills is adequate. DES already has the authority to prevent development of a landfill at a site where surface water impacts could occur, and therefore HB 1454 is not necessary. For example, under existing New Hampshire regulation, there's a landfill siting requirement for a hydrogeologic study requiring the landfill applicant to demonstrate that the proposed landfill is sited in an area where the potential release of contaminants can be addressed prior to prevent impacts to surface water. Proponents of HB 1454 suggest that New Hampshire's existing 200-foot setback to landfills to surface water is inadequate without taking into account that this is only the minimum setback requirement, just as is proposed in this bill. The 200-foot setback is not applicable if surface water protection cannot be demonstrated. Regarding setbacks, you may have heard it mentioned that landfills in Maine have a 6-year groundwater travel time setback to surface water. It's important to understand that Maine regulations allow offsets for certain design and monitoring approaches. Features such as additional liners, leak detection systems, creation of a contingency plan, and remedial action funding mechanism can be used to reduce the 6-year travel time requirement. Theoretically, offsets could be used in some cases to reduce the 6-year requirement to 0. Notably, many of the features considered offsets in Maine are required components of a lined landfill in New Hampshire. Therefore, direct comparison of the 6-year travel time in Maine to the 5-year travel time proposed for New Hampshire is not a fully accurate or representative comparison. My second point, the rationale for a 5-year travel time restriction is not supported in New Hampshire law. Proponents of HB 1454 have suggested that the bill's methods were adopted from a US EPA approach for evaluating siting industrial facilities relative to public drinking water supplies, so-called source water protection areas. While the proposed approach in HB 1454 may be generally similar in some ways to US EPA guidance, there is a critical difference. The US EPA and New Hampshire source protection rules do not include restrictions that prohibit specific land uses, such as landfills, based on a 5-year or other groundwater travel time to a potential drinking water supply. We should ask, why should landfills be restricted based on this approach when no other industry in New Hampshire is restricted in this manner? And why should regulatory preference be given to expansion at existing facilities? Under the bill's provisions, it is possible that the new and expanded facilities could have the same liner systems, leachate and gas collection systems, waste types, and capacities, yet they would be regulated much differently. To have differing levels of environmental permitting and regulation makes no regulatory or technical sense. Further, HB 1454 requires calculation of the 5-year distance of travel to be based on the maximum seepage velocity value, which is not consistent with standard hydrogeologic practice for calculating a representative site-wide value, typically based on spatial averages from testing. Using HB 1454 as an absolute site screening tool carries with it a major assumption, that there are a large number of sites in New Hampshire on which to develop landfills. This assumption is not valid. Given the practical considerations for siting a landfill and the numerous setbacks to landfills, there are simply not a large number of properties available in the state on which to site a landfill. If a suitable site were to have a groundwater time even marginally less than 5 years, say 4 or 4.5 years, it would be disqualified for consideration for landfill development. Also, 5 years is an unnecessarily long travel time. Corrective actions to mitigate a potential release that presents a significant threat to groundwater or surface water would be required by DES much sooner than 5 years. To potentially prohibit landfill development at otherwise suitable sites based on an arbitrary groundwater travel time is not prudent for the future of the state's solid waste management. In closing, amended HB 1454 should be struck down because of its arbitrary requirement for groundwater travel time and the redundancy with current DES regulations, which are adequately protective. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before the committee today. I welcome any questions.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions from the members of the committee? Senator Gray.
You mentioned additional liners. We heard an explanation from the last witness about the liner system that he described. Can you expand on what you were referring to?
That's correct, Senator. Thank you for your question. What I was referring to was the main regulations which allow offsets, so reductions in years of travel time if an additional liner is installed. They recognize that would be a requirement for a New Hampshire landfill to have a primary and a secondary liner. Maine views the secondary liner, in my understanding, as effectively a way to reduce the 6-year travel time requirement.
Further questions? Just out of curiosity, is there a third liner? Could you do a third liner? I know it's very expensive, I'm sure, but is that?
I'm not involved in the actual design of a facility. I'm not aware of a facility that has a third liner. Just a primary and secondary that I'm aware of in New Hampshire.
All right. Another question on my concern earlier, that if unable to drill wells to test the flow rates on private property between the proposed site and the body of water, okay, would you be able to get an accurate reflection of the flow of water from the site to the body of water?
I think if I understand your question in the context of the proposed language of the bill is referring to values that are only from borings within the proposed footprint, so they would not be representative of down gradient areas where the direction which groundwater flows. And further, the bill would require the maximum seepage velocity value to be calculated, which in most of my experience, you would take a site-wide average, a spatial average of the area, which might include off-site down gradient areas.
Thank you very much. Further questions? Thank you for your testimony. Next up, Nikki Roy. Welcome.
Good morning, and thank you for allowing me to speak here this morning. My name is Nikki DeLude-Roy. I am I'm Vice President and Senior Consultant at a firm called Verdantis. We were previously called GeoInsight about a year ago. I have a bachelor's degree in geology and a master's degree in hydrogeology. I'm a hydrogeologist with about 25 years of environmental consulting experience, about 20 of those spent working on landfills, lined and unlined, both in the state of New Hampshire and a number of states across the country. I'm also a licensed professional geologist in the state of New Hampshire, and I currently serve as the chair of the New Hampshire Professional Geologist Board. I'm here today to oppose House Bill 1454 for a number of reasons, which I'll touch on very quickly here and are hopefully described a bit more thoroughly in my written testimony. I'm going to echo a lot of what Mr. White just said. We did not actually prepare together, but I'll echo a number of the points that he made. First, passage of this bill is not necessary to protect surface water in the state because the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services currently has regulations in place that do just that. They govern the siting, construction, operation, and closure of solid waste facilities in New Hampshire. And one of the existing provisions actually already serves to identify protective distance to sensitive receptors, including surface water bodies. In addition, if passage of House Bill 1454 would arbitrarily remove one of those setback criteria and put it in statute, while leaving setbacks from things like drinking water wells, um, uh, um, drinking water sources, wetlands, the 100-year flood in the regulations, so really separating those setbacks. The existing regulations already require an applicant who might want to propose and develop a landfill in the state to hire an independent hydrogeologist to do a comprehensive hydrogeology analysis of the site-specific conditions at that proposed development. And as evidenced by earlier reference to the data from Mount Carberry, would actually include calculation of that maximum seepage velocity, which is included in the bill. This is already covered in the existing regulations. On the surface, it may appear that the 5-year time of travel setback may be more protective of surface water than the 200-foot setback in the regulation. However, as Mr. White referenced, that 200-foot setback is indeed a minimum setback. It allows the New Hampshire DES scientists, engineers, geologists, the experts that we have at the state, to look at the site-specific information and determine what the appropriate setback is. One could imagine a situation where a surface water body is actually a direct drinking water source, for example, and you could imagine a situation where the DES might require a setback from that surface water body that is much more significant than 5 years. But if the 5-year setback got pulled into the state statute, that eliminates the experts at DES and their ability to make a site-specific judgment and increase that distance as may be appropriate. Second, on a very high level, based on a very high level GIS analysis, I just wanted to make a point that the state currently has 7 operating lined landfills in the state. If House Bill 1454 were in place prior to permitting and construction of those landfills, using a very high level quick analysis, at least 3 of those 7 landfills would not be permitted. They would be sort of kicked out and identified early in the process and would never have been allowed to be developed. If you step back and recognize that the state does have a significant challenge in managing waste across the state, that would have eliminated almost 50% of our current existing landfill capacity. Lastly, I'd like to argue earlier points made. Lined modern landfills are not documented sources of contamination of groundwater and surface water. They're constructed with double liners, engineered systems with leak detection systems, and there are ways to alert landfill operators quickly if there was a leak from a primary liner. There's also modern landfills are constructed with active leachate collection systems, which properly collect and identify moisture that comes with landfills and degradation of waste. This bill may be intended to be modeled after the state of Maine. However, it's really important to emphasize the point that Mr. White made. In the state of Maine, that 6-year travel time setback can be reduced in acknowledgement of the importance of engineering and institutional controls, and the fact that those engineering and institutional controls, when built properly and permitted correctly, can allow landfills to exist adjacent to or closer to surface water bodies and other sensitive receptors. I urge the Senate committee not to pass House Bill 1454, but rather to continue to allow DES to regulate the setback of landfills to surface water as they do drinking water supplies, geologic faults, wetlands, and other sensitive receptors through their existing set of regulations. Thank you for your time.
Questions from the committee? Senator Gaeta.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In your professional opinion, your experience in the field, are the current DES regulations and rules sufficient to protect groundwater and subsurface water?
I agree completely with that statement, yes. DES has groundwater release detection permits that they assign to operating landfills, and those systems allow or require landfills to be monitored usually quarterly, and that data to be provided to the state. And so on a quarterly basis, you're reporting groundwater conditions in a series of monitoring wells established to monitor and detect any impact from a landfill with a lot of notice, and those data are being reported to the state within 45 days of collection. And so there's a very short time frame between collection of groundwater data and reporting it to the state for problems to be identified in the existing process.
Follow.
In your professional opinion, does DES appropriately respond to leaks or other pollution incidents relative to groundwater and subsurface water?
Thank you for your question. DES has certainly been very responsive in my experience, and in fact, given that I've worked in a number of other states, I would say DES is certainly more responsive than other states that I've worked in also.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for your testimony. Seeing no further questions, I really appreciate it. Okay, so like I stated earlier, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 more bills to hear before 12 o'clock, before we get kicked out of this room. So we're going to ask further speakers to be under at least a minute or under. Just there's people waiting to hear their bills. They've traveled a long ways, just as many of you, but I wanted to make sure that your representatives who are supporting this bill had ample amount of time to represent you on this. So with that, I'm going to ask Mr. Gold, if you would mind, are you here to speak?
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Brian Gould. I'm a lawyer with Cleveland Waters and Bass here in Concord, and I'm here today to oppose House Bill 1464, which I'm afraid is nothing but a targeted project killer masquerading as an environmental protection bill. Now, I'm mindful of the chairman's immediate comments, so I'm going to, or comments about keeping this short, so I'm going to kind of cut to the chase. I think what's important to consider is what you haven't heard today. No one has told you that there have been releases of leachate from landfill liners to groundwater. No one has indicated that there have been contaminants from lined landfills that have polluted surface water. No one has told you that the existing setback in DES rules has proven ineffective or unworkable. No one has suggested that DES thinks this bill fills a gap in its regulatory scheme. No one has offered a scientific basis for 5 years as a measuring period. No one has told you how long it now takes, except Ms. Roy just referred to it, how long it now takes to begin remediation of groundwater contamination. Do we really want 5 years to transpire between the detection and the commencement of remediation as this bill contemplates? And no one has explained why the bill would allow expansions of existing landfills into areas with less than 5 years of groundwater travel time to perennial surface water. Yet that is accepted under the bill. The reason this bill reads the way it does is that the proponents looked at the groundwater data at the Dalton site and thought that it could not meet the 5-year travel time. And so they backed into this provision to kill this deal without considering what effect it would have on other sites. Ms. Roy just testified to, or I believe Mr. White testified, that this would very likely make it virtually impossible to site a landfill in the state of New Hampshire. And they haven't considered that. They haven't testified about it. The reason for the 5 years remains obscured. I don't understand where that came from because no one has explained it to you other than it seems like a good number. And this is inconsistent with the rule of law. The rule of law refers to neutral application of principles to individuals. This is not the neutral application of law. This is the application of power to affect a single individual. This bill is not worthy of becoming law in this state, and I urge you to vote it ITL.
Thank you for your testimony and for your brevity. And getting to the point, are there questions from the committee? Thank you very much. We really appreciate it. Berkeley Pat note? Did I say that right? Parento? Parento. You have the floor. You're in charge.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and the members of the committee for this chance to speak to you. I am Berkeley Parento, and I'm skipping my 7th grade classes today to tell you why I support the House Bill 1454. First, you should know that like many people my age, I'm worried about our environment and our water and all the ways we've caused pollution. The contamination we have created hurts all life, plants, animals, and people. It could ruin the future for my generation. The decisions you make today will have consequences that you may never see, but I will see them. I've spent much of my life in New Hampshire at my grandparents' Whitefield home near a beautiful clean lake where I swim with my family, play fetch with my dog Winnie, jump from the floating dock with my cousins, and take boat rides with my grampy. Last summer I learned to paddleboard there, and I love my time at the lake, but now I'm worried that the water there may not be safe for the future. I've learned that the proper placement of a landfill is critical, and there is a correct and incorrect way to build them. The correct way is to place them on locations with the proper foundation. I've learned that our life at the lake could be ruined by a landfill. A leak or a spill at a landfill even several miles away could ruin the water. We know that clean water is a basic need for all forms of life, and it brings exercise and activities that keep us well and happy. House Bill 1454 asks you to put landfills in places that will keep water safe and healthy. Landfills like Mount Carberry and Success and Turnkey in Rochester have soils that slow the flow of toxic water if there's an accidental leak or spill. This can allow the problem to be corrected so that our waters are not ruined by harmful chemicals. The danger of our waters from badly located landfills is a problem you can correct for the best interests of my generation and the future of this wonderful state. I ask you committee members along with the entire legislature and Governor Sununu to pass this smart, simple law. Landfills bring many dangers to our waters and environment. House Bill 1454 is a way to make them safer right from the beginning by making sure they are built at the least damaging areas. I'll leave you with a quote from the great character Albus Dumbledore from the Harry Potter series. We must all face the choice between what's right and what is easy. I hope you choose what's right. Thank you.
Did you write that yourself?
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well done. Well spoken. Questions from the committee? So what grade?
I'm in 7th grade.
7th grade. When I was in 4th grade, I used to live in Nashua. And years ago, I loved to fish in the Merrimack River. And right where I used to fish is right at the bridge. And when I was a kid, I watched raw sewage going into that river. It was gross, but I really liked to fish. So I tolerated it. And one day I caught myself a huge carp on bragging rights because nobody else gave me credit for it, and I dragged it home. But
Did you eat it?
we did not eat it. But you know what? There were a lot of families that did choose to eat those carp. I actually used it for fertilizer because I wanted to do like the American Indians did. Okay? So anyway. So a lot has happened since then. And now you're finding people fishing there. There's raw sewage isn't going in. It's actually being treated. So we're on the path to making progress compared to what I grew up with. So with regards to your statement, we saw it when it was really bad. And we are very, very sensitive to the fact that we want clean water. So we really appreciate your testimony. You did a great job. You got a great future ahead of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Senator Guidon with a question? Berkeley? Your father doesn't own the college, does he? Or you, all right.
So if you wouldn't mind, if you could share with the members of the committee anything that you see that's wrong with the current laws that you want to see changed.
This is not a test.
I don't know. I feel like just like do what's right and like if you kind of think about like the not really. To be honest, I don't really know, but like I feel like you should just like really like think about it because if you really think about it, putting like a landfill right next to a lake is not the best idea because like a bunch of people like rely on activities and like things that they enjoy in there, and I feel like that could just like ruin so many wonderful things that we have, I guess.
Thank you. Follow-up.
So I'm going to be persistent. I may not be popular, but I'm going to be persistent. My question is, do you feel that the rules and the regulations in place by our Department of Environmental Services are jeopardizing the water body near your home?
Yeah.
You do. And
Follow-up.
thank you. And how is that happening? Is there not adequate testing? Is there not adequate preparation beforehand, follow-up after the fact that it's built? Can you help us with that?
To be honest, I haven't really looked it up, but or like learned about it that much. But like some stuff that I do know, I guess, is that like they're like. To be honest, I don't really know because I haven't really looked anything up from it. But yeah, kind of.
That's okay, and thank you very much. I do have more people that I have to grill. Thank you,
Yeah.
Senator. So it's tough sometimes when you get up here and you got to testify, and of course you get put on the spot. I get like grilled, and sometimes I get this blank stare in my eyes.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, oh, what do I do? So anyway, you did a great job, and you were there for some tough questions too. So good for you. Well done.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, Tom Tower, do not wish to speak. Okay. Fred Anderson. Definitely gonna have to limit. Oh yeah. Sorry, Fred. I just got to keep you at a minimal.
Yeah, that happened last year
Yeah.
too, so
Apologize for that.
I understand it's not your
Trying to be
fault.
fair to everybody.
Simply, my word of thanks to each of you. I want to make this as quick as I can. This is the bill you asked for last year. Senator Gray, you talked about 200 feet. You talked about 2 miles being arbitrary. I don't know anything more arbitrary than 200 feet. And I'm sure you understand what I mean by that. You said we needed science, and we've given you science. And we've given you a science that's credible, and it's not one size fits all. You were concerned that a circle around a spot was inappropriate, the flows might be different. We've designed that to answer your questions. I'll be glad to take whatever follow-up you want. Senator Avard, we did the same thing. You asked me probably 3 times in my testimony, why state parks? Why not water? And you were, of course, absolutely right. And so this is designed to talk about water and to preserve it. It's a 5-year setback. That 5 years is not about commencing remediation, as Mr. Gould said. It's to give time to detect, determine, decide on what appropriate engineering would be, apply it, and finish it. We're here about protecting water, and we're here about trying to design some kind of criteria. No criteria is going to be perfect. We understand that. But House Bill 1454 is a heck of a lot more perfect than what we're dealing with right now. So I urge you to support it. If there are things that are wrong with it, we can change it. That's what legislation is about. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions? Senator Gray, seeing how you were commented first, and then Senator Waters.
Although I do like this bill a lot more than last year's. We've just had testimony from 2 licensed hydrologists that is already in statute what is wrong with the statute that's out there right now that would not protect what we're trying to do in this bill.
With all due respect, Senator, I'm not a hydrologist. We did have a hydrologist that spoke to you some time ago. That person is unfortunately not available, but we can provide that. But tell us specifically what's wrong, and I guarantee we'll be back next year with answers to that.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Waters?
Thank you. And first, would you believe that, not that I can speak for Mr. Wimsatt, but in a recent conversation, he agreed that the 200 feet was pretty arbitrary.
Absolutely.
But here's the question to you, is that we have heard just a little while ago that there's no reason for this 5 years, but isn't it the case that there are many other states that have a similar 5 or 6 year rule?
I've asked the question as to why 5, and I have been told, and I think it came from DES, but we'll have to check it, that that's a period of time that's reasonable in which to detect, determine, and remediate. And if it's moving fast, you're going to have polluted water. You're going to have the Amanuensis if we talk specifically about where we are. And by the way, Senator Guida, I live on the lake and I'm opposed to this. I'd be delighted to have them come and drill a test well in my front yard because I know what the flow of water is there. I live on a lake. This is between landfills and water sources. Do you know many water sources that are not sandy soil? Excuse me, I want to go back to Senator Waters.
I've got 1 hour to do four more bills. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, sir.
Nancy Charbonneau? Yeah, I'll have 1 hour to do all of those, yeah. Yes?
Carbonneau.
Oh, Carbonneau. I'm dyslexic, so I can go over it. All right, Wayne Morrison, while we're waiting for Nancy.
By the way, she's my wife, that's why I'm always her.
Okay. Thank you, Wayne, and I hate to rush you. I've got 1 hour to do 5 more bills, so 4 more bills. Just, yeah. Thank you. If you want to both testify together, are you both? Is that okay, or?
Well, not at the same time. I'll let Wayne speak and I'll speak.
All right.
Okay.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you. And I'll try, I have a 5-minute speech. I'm going to try and do it in a minute, which.
I'm going to have to hold you to it.
Okay. So first of all, obviously, there's an awful lot of interest in this bill. The people here are overfilling into the lobby. I have in the package that I'm handing out to you a lot of people that couldn't be here today. We handed out a letter and had signatures of over 200 people in and across the state who support this bill and ask you to do the same. There's a list of business people and private citizens. I also have a letter from a hydrogeologist, Muriel Robinette, who was in person and presented testimony. It's included in there, supporting the bill and tries in layman's terms to describe what is the science so that somebody that is not a scientist can understand what it's all about. In addition to that, there's a number of business people, prominent business people in the North Country, people like Dave Kerner and David Sunman, who have written letters to you, not only from the environmental side, but thinking that this bill is very good for businesses, very good for entrepreneurs and small businesses across the state. When I think about this bill, so much has happened since 1991 when that regulation was put in place. And Mr. Guida, my answer to your question would be I absolutely think there's antiquated regulations that need updating in the system. I have a great deal of respect for DES. They need our help. They need your help. And I think this 200-foot setback is an absolute shining example of something that needs to be changed. Since 1991, 7 years after that bill was presented and became law, was the first time that the EPA started hearing things and concerns about toxic fluorinated chemicals like PFAS. This bill was in place before we even knew what to be worried about. The breadth and change of technological changes in the state brings both benefits and risks. What we're asking you to do is think seriously about those risks. Why today are we still operating with this 200-foot setback? House Bill 1454 requires no new testing that applicants don't already do. It's being used in many other states, not just Maine. It simply requires that the test be done at the front end of the process, and it requires that the site be appropriately evaluated before more work gets done. This bill doesn't ban landfills. It doesn't restrict how many landfills we have. It applies to any and all new landfills, and it leverages science for the first time to really have safe, site-specific measurements of where landfill should go relative to bodies of water. House Bill 1454 provides the state with the opportunity to ensure siting of new landfills is science-based and delivers real, reliable, and predictable protection. The purpose of a setback is to provide a margin of safety. And I am going quickly, Senator. In essence, it's about risk management. Despite the latest technologies currently available by the best intentioned landfill operators, accidents occur People make mistakes, switches and valves fail, double line materials deteriorate. Shit happens. It happens every day. I spent 40 years in tech. We should press the operators to continue to apply technology, but this bill is about a barrier, a risk management system beyond that. When things inevitably go south, the only thing protecting our rivers, our lakes, our our water supplies is the setback distance that is in front of you today. House Bill 1454 is not going to solve all the state solid waste problems, but it's smart, pragmatic, and it's common sense, and we need you to support it.
15 seconds.
Good.
Wrap it up.
I ask you to recognize the urgency to address this issue of this out-of-date, arbitrary, and dangerous 200-foot setback, to have the courage, not as Republicans and not as Democrats, but as loyal and as passionate Granite Staters, to do something about this issue before it is too late. Please support House Bill 1454 ought to pass. Thank you.
Thank you, and I apologize for having to rush you. I've got 1 hour to do 5 more bills.
I would just ask you to think about, I know you've got other bills, what you're deciding, the next landfill that goes through, we have to live with for the next 100 years.
Got it.
It's not a simple thing. We ask you to please support this bill.
Thank you. And Nancy? All right, while we're waiting for Nancy, Mr. Velo? Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm going to call on people in the room from now on at this point, because I've got very short window of time to go through some bills. So Nancy, I'm going to rush you.
Yep,
Sorry
mine's
about
pretty
that.
short,
Okay.
and I'm a quick talker.
If you have written testimony, just pass that in and just speak from your heart.
I'm going to read it, because I don't have anything to pass out to you at the moment, although something could be emailed if needed.
Well, yeah, you can share that with the committee. I'm running out of time.
Okay, can I talk fast?
Yes, you can talk
Okay,
fast.
all right. As you've heard a couple times, I'm Nancy Morrison. I'm from Mount Vernon, New Hampshire. And I've worked really hard to educate myself on the matters of waste management and landfilling out of concern for our water, land, people, legacy. I come here today before you to ask for your support for House Bill 1454, a bill that updates New Hampshire's antiquated land testing siting criteria, which you've heard already. The science behind this updated bill does not come to you today like a rabbit out of a hat. It has been used successfully for decades to site new landfills in other states, such as Maine. Turnkey Landfill in Rochester, New Hampshire's largest landfill, and Mount Carberry, our second largest landfill, are both located in geologically appropriate soils that would protect New Hampshire water bodies within the 5-year remediation window HB 1454 provides. They are examples that New Hampshire has appropriate soil conditions to site a landfill. Counter to the thought that HB 1454 would make siting a new landfill more difficult, it would make it more safe, as well as less costly to the developer, DES, and the state in the long run. 2 paragraphs. I ask all of you senators, please take a moment. You can proactively decide to prevent the possibility of the next New Hampshire Superfund site cleanup. And I'm not saying this with unnecessary drama. We have way too many of these in New Hampshire now, and one of them is the Coakley landfill in Northampton, where groundwater, surface water, and wells have been found to be contaminated with PFAS and dioxane. If House Bill 1454 had been in place when the Coakley landfill was looking for a home, this would not be a Superfund cleanup site today. I assume none of you want your name and legacy attached to a new poorly sited landfill that would have the real possibility of contaminating New Hampshire's water bodies simply because it is available. HB 1454 is not anti-landfill. It's not anti-business. It is about proper and responsible landfill siting. It is about environmental justice and protecting the people of New Hampshire. Everyone's future depends on each one of us rising up above our habits, our prejudices, our party lines and our fears to preserve a livable environment where life can thrive. And just to throw in from the past testimony, from what I understand, some sites do use the 4-year amount to track water velocity travel, and some use 6. So the people that have looked into this have thought that 5 was a really good place to be in the middle. There's a lot of science behind this. Anywho, please, senators, vote to pass 1454 as alternates.
Thank you very much for your testimony, and sorry to rush you.
That's okay.
Yeah, Henry Vaden? Same constraints?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Henry Vayu, and I'm here on behalf of Waste Management, which operates the landfill in Rochester. This bill, as stated in the methodology by the department, wouldn't directly impact the Turnkey landfill because, as the department states, the way the bill is worded doesn't affect existing landfills and expansions of their landfills. But when these bills come through, the company does take a look at the bills through the lenses of if it did in someday apply to their operation. And we are opposed to the bill largely because we think it's unnecessary, that the protections we have in place are sufficient. I'm not speaking for the department, but I think the fact that they have no position and are not here asking you to give them this tool to have in their toolbox, I think does speak some volumes. So, I give a lot of credit to the proponents of the bill. They're persistent. Ultimately, the goal is to stop the landfill up north, but doing that is not necessarily good public policy. So that's it.
Thank you, Henry. Really appreciate it. Heidi Trimmer, do you have written testimony?
I do.
Could I just ask you to submit that and
I can keep my comments incredibly short.
greatly appreciated.
So Heidi Tremarco, Conservation Law Foundation. As you'll see in the written comments, we have documentation, and you've heard today, that all landfills leak. And I want to point out that you heard that not only from the people supporting this bill, but also from Ms. Roy, the hydrogeologist who is opposing the bill, who testified that in her experience, DES responds regularly and very well to leaks. So we heard testimony from people on both sides of the bill that these landfills are leaking. And because they leak, this is a very common sense measure. There is no reason to suppose that, as Mr. Gold testified, this would cause a shortage of landfills in the state. DES has testified repeatedly that we have excess landfill capacity. New Hampshire does not need any landfills right now. We have plenty of capacity, and it makes sense to slow down, put common sense measures in place that are based on science. The hydrogeologists you heard from today opposed the bill, but respectfully also both testified that they are employed by the landfill companies in landfill siting. So I'd like you to consider the hydrogeologist testimony that was handed to you before. And finally, Ms. Roy testified that we can imagine that DES would impose stricter setbacks than the 200 feet, but DES does not do that. They impose the standards that are set in the regulations and in the statute. And so let's not imagine that they're going to do better. Let's put these requirements on DES to protect our state and protect our resources.
Thank you for your brevity. Thank you for your testimony. Matt Leahy. Matt, I got to really rush you now. You are the last speaker.
Senator,
And
I'm Matt Leahy, Policy Director for the Forest. I do have written testimony, which I will submit and
Thank you.
make that my comments.
I really appreciate that.
Absolutely.
And
Obviously, I'll take any questions, but
seeing none. Thank you very much, and I'm going to be closing the hearing on 1454. Opening up the hearing to HB 1599. Ready for the prime sponsor? 1599. Actually, I was surprised. Just, yeah, if you have written testimony, and I have to apologize. I've got 4 more bills. Yeah, everybody was taking your time.
I didn't see him over at Senate Energy. I assume he's here today. I mean, I didn't see him in his fees out there.
Kristen, I'm really sorry. I
I have written testimony.
Thank you. Yeah, that'll work. Thank you, and thank you. And who's the prime sponsor? What?
This is what you need now.
$15.99. I'm. If he's not here, I'll move to the next bill. I'm a little anxious over this. Yeah, I know, and I've got 5 bills to introduce as well, so I'm just trying to be. Thank you. So we were almost 2 hours on that last bill, and I've got an hour to basically do 4 more bills. So everybody's going to be on a very short leash today. I apologize for making you wait. Representative O's, you're on. What time's your bill? This sucks. Yeah. Wait. You have the floor, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everyone. Finally, we can start. I'm here to, for the record, I'm Representative Michael Vose. I represent Rockingham District 9, the town of Epping. I'm Chair of Science, Technology, and Energy. I'm here to introduce House Bill 1599. It's a relatively simple bill that attempts to correct a mistake that was made back in 2017 when the latest tariff was established for net metering for customer generators who generate over 100 kilowatts of electricity. Back then, what happened was the Public Utilities Commission changed the way that net metering customers were compensated for the energy they put back onto the grid. Prior to 2017, those customers received a credit for all of the kilowatt hours that they put onto the grid. The new tariff in 2017 changed that scheme and monetized the value of the kilowatt hours that were put back onto the grid by a customer generator. What that did was it required the utilities, or made the utilities obligated to pay for the amount of electricity used by the customer generator, even though the customer generator got credited for part of that energy. So to give you a concrete example, if a customer generator had put 1,000 kilowatt hours of electricity onto the grid and received cash for 500 of that, the utility was obligated to pay RPS on the full 1,000 kilowatt hours. But the customer generator wasn't paying his fair share of that 1,000 kilowatt hours. So that's what the Honorable Cliff Below described as the missing money problem. I'm going to read to you from testimony that he delivered before ST&E. And I quote, "The problem with the current compensation of full default service rate is that it creates a missing money problem that results in substantial and ironic undue cost shifting that did not occur before 2017 with traditional net metering. This particular change in how RPS compliance costs are calculated, creating the current missing money / cost shifting problem, was not explicitly recognized by any of the parties or PUC staff or commissioners in DE 16-576, the PUC docket, in which the first iteration of alternative net energy metering tariffs were developed." So HB 1599 actually puts into statute language that was authored by the Honorable Mr. Below that essentially says that a customer generator cannot be compensated for RPS costs that are due, because that would shift costs to everybody else in the system because the utility is still on the hook for that obligation. So that's it in a nutshell. I consider this bill to be a technical fix. I'm sure the PUC will address it when they complete their next iteration of net metering tariff generation or establishment. But in the meantime, we think it's important to shift as few costs as possible to non-net metering customers, and this bill will do that. And with that, I know we're in a time crunch here, so I'd be happy to take questions and
Thank you,
move on.
Representative. So just real quickly before I have to go, you are saying that Cliff Beal helped you draft this?
He did. He actually helped draft the bill, yes.
All right, Senator Gaeta.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Very quickly, Representative, is this an issue that's being looked at by the Department of Energy study regarding cost shifting in net metering?
The value of distributed energy resources study.
That one.
I don't know the substance of everything they're looking at in that study. They hired a consultant, so until we see the study, we won't know what's in it, you know.
There's a nod in the back, so in the affirmative. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Now, we have 3 other bills to hear after this, so what I'm going to do is limit everybody to 1 minute and 30 seconds.
Excuse me, Representative Bose,
After
could you provide us with Bealo's letter, because he's not here today.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll make you a copy.
All right.
See if you give it to Daley, he'll take care of it.
Rep. Cap McGee, I know you're. Oh, you didn't. Okay, and you're, for the record, you're opposed. Okay, Rep. Oh, so you're not opposed. You're supporting now. Okay.
Very convincing.
Rep. Lex. Okay. Oppose. Rep. I think that's Louise. Partial. All right. Okay. Never mind. Greg Moore. You're at the top of the list, so I just wanted to give the reps their first due here.
Absolutely. As a former staffer, the reps always come first, right?
Yes.
Except when the senators are in the room. For the record, my name is Greg Moore. I'm the state director with Americans for Prosperity here in New Hampshire. I'll be very brief because I learned a lot about landfills and didn't talk much about energy, so we'll talk very quickly about energy. We support this bill as well as the next bill. I'm going to skip testifying on the next bill because our views are materially the same. Obviously, we have no problem with customer generators. Our issue is with the cost that's passed along to other ratepayers. And legislation like this in the next bill, which would reduce the cost shifting onto other ratepayers. I understand the Department of Energy is in the middle of a process of reviewing this currently, but we think these are positive steps, and we'd encourage you to pass both. And that's all I'll say in the interest of time.
Thank you. Questions from the committee? Seeing none. Josh Elliott. In the middle. And with that, I'm going to have to get going.
Morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Josh Elliott from New Hampshire Department of Energy. The department has, sorry, okay. Nope. For the Department of Energy, the department takes no position as neutral on this bill. It is pretty straightforward, as Representative Vose had laid out. I would note that as currently written, this would only apply to new customer generators with a total peaking capacity of greater than 1 megawatt. So this would only impact municipal hosts who are allowed to generate above 1 megawatt. So I don't know if that was consideration, but just to highlight that fact. But with that, knowing that you're pressed on time, happy to attempt to answer any questions that the committee may have.
Any questions from members of the committee? Hearing none, we'll let you off easy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Right. Next up, Sam Evans-Brown from Clean Energy New Hampshire, speaking in opposition. Again, please keep it quick.
Thanks. Happy to keep it quick. Our position is essentially that while this bill in principle makes a certain kind of sense, it is only looking at one half of the ledger, whereas there are many benefits to the grid and many cost shifts that go in the opposite direction. For instance, whenever a renewable generation facility is producing a reduction in coincident peak demand, that is lowering capacity payments that are needed to be made regionally, as well as transmission payments. And so why would we simply look at reducing compensation to these municipal facilities that frankly, HB 315 was only just passed, and these facilities are just getting off the ground. The developers that are trying to make these new projects pencil out haven't even really gotten their feet underneath them, and we're already looking to shift their compensation. We would simply say that the appropriate thing to do in this case is to wait for that value of distributed energy resources study so that we can look at both sides of the ledger and have a more fulsome discussion of what is the appropriate compensation regime for these distributed energy resources, as opposed to piecemeal looking at individual items.
Any questions from members of the committee?
If I may,
Senator White.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Sam, I hear what you're saying. I also understand what Vose and Bulow are saying as well. In terms of the folks who are just getting started on this, what if we kick the effective date out for a year so that people would know this was coming and would have an opportunity to if they are getting projects going, but otherwise understand this is what's coming.
Certainly that would help the impact of this bill. What I can tell you is that I have conversations weekly with solar developers who are interested in coming into the market because of HB 315. The feasibility of those projects is actually fairly limited, is what we've learned. There are not many municipalities in the state of New Hampshire that actually can support a 1 to 5 megawatt project. And then the further restriction that the project needs to be located within the geographic boundaries of the municipality has meant that there will not be many projects as a result of 315. And so this is just an additional restriction that will mean that there'll likely be fewer of them. So I would say you'll see in our testimony that is one of our concerns with the language of this bill is that there's not an effective date in there. I believe, unless that has been changed since I last looked at it. So certainly having a date that makes it.
There is one 60 days after passage.
60 days after passage. So, we continue to oppose the bill. I think the finances for these municipal projects are already fairly tenuous in New Hampshire without chopping an extra half a cent off of their compensation rate.
Thank you.
Further questions? Hearing none? Let's see, Heidi Kroll. You have 5 seconds, just kidding.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Heidi Kroll. I work at Gallagher, Callahan, and Gartrell, and I'm here today representing both the Granite State Hydropower Association and Monadnock Paper Mills. And we are opposed to this bill for a lot of the same reasons that Sam Evans-Brown has expressed. Our concern really is that, one, as you are well aware, the value of distributed energy resources study is nearing completion. We've heard, I think, late spring. And the purpose of that study was to look at all of the values, the potential cost shifting, all of those things. And so we think this is kind of, jumping the gun a little bit. As Sam Evans-Brown said, only looking at one side of the ledger without looking at the other side of the ledger, which could include avoided distribution cost, avoided transmission cost, avoided capacity cost, environmental benefits, et cetera. So it's also important to remember that at the PUC docket, where this whole process was kind of kicked off with the studies, all of the stakeholders that were involved there, the utilities, the consumer advocate types, renewable advocates, which included the Granite State Hydropower Association, and at the time the Office of Energy and Planning, all agreed to work within the alternative net metering tariff that was adopted and work with that until the study was completed. So this was kind of a little bit of an end run around that. We do think that there's value for net metered energy above the default rate. So The final thing I would say is that if you are inclined to move forward with this bill, we do think that new should be clearly defined. It's not clear what exactly new means. In other pieces of legislation, you have said, for example, first became operational after a certain date. And so we would, if you are, we do not support the bill, but if you're inclined to move forward with it, we would ask for that clarification. And depending, I would kind of try to sync it up, I think, with whenever the effective date is that you ultimately decide on. So perhaps July 1st of this year, July 1st of next year. I'm done. Thank you very much.
Any questions from members of the committee? Hearing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Next up, Jennifer Smith.
I don't think I said I'd speak, but I will. Thank you.
All right.
So,
you got 30 seconds.
Okay. So I cannot speak on behalf of my town energy committee because we're an advisory committee and I don't have that power. But I would note that the things that were said by Heidi Kroll could apply in our town if we got to the point of saying, oh, there's hydropower in this town that is being limited use by private people who might be induced to allow some kind of a contract with the town to use more of their hydropower because they could go beyond the 1 megawatt. So I agree that it makes things a little less useful, and I own a small array that's in group net metering, and it was really difficult to pencil out, even with grant money, how we were going to make that work. And when you take away some of the reward,
10 seconds.
Okay, and there's not real balance in how you're looking at this. I agree it should be put on to the docket for the other.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I didn't even notice you weren't going to speak, so I'm glad that you did, though. Not speaking, but in opposition, Jason Stock, New Hampshire Timberland Owners. That completes the list of people. Is there anyone in the audience that hasn't spoken and wishes to?
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
Could I ask the question of Representative Owes?
Oh, certainly.
Yeah.
Representative?
Thanks for coming back, Representative. So Heidi Kroll's issue of new, do you want to give us a little phrase afterwards about how you might, whether we need a kind of a clarification of new to be something like first became operational after, or do you think that's necessary?
Well, since our state constitution prohibits legislating backwards, the assumption would be that any new generation that came online after the passage of the bill would be subject to the new tariff.
And given the fact that we're going to get the report at some point, would it make sense to kick out the implementation date or not?
Well, since this fixes a problem that is occurring now, I think it should be implemented as soon as possible. And then the PUC will make a new tariff determination at some point in the future that will probably take all this into account. But in the meantime, costs are being shifted to other customers, and I don't think we should do that.
And I guess we'll find out if costs are also being saved too. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Thank you. All right. Anyone else in the audience who has spoken and wishes to speak again or has not spoken and would like to speak a first time? Hearing none, close the hearing on Senate Bill, or House Bill, 1599. I need the list of the next bill. What's the next one? Oh, thank you. And we will open the hearing on the next bill, which is House Bill 1629 FN, an act relative to default service for net metering. Representative?
Senator Gaida, members of the committee. My name is Lex Berezny and I represent Grafton District 9. Thank you for the opportunity to introduce HB 1629. This bill aims to bring fairness and improve the competitive environment for electric utilities and consumers by redefining the price paid to consumer generators through net metering. Net metering is when an electric utility is required to purchase excess electricity from their customer. The rate at which the utility must buy this electricity is currently the same as the rate at which it sells electricity to other customers. This requirement to buy and sell electricity at the same price means that the distributor is not able to recoup overhead costs of facilitating the transfer. When you are forced to buy and sell something at the same price, it is not a competitive environment. Of course, there is no magic here. This missing overhead is recouped by raising electricity rates for everyone else. HB 1629 simply adds the missing definition for calculating the rate so that when an electric utility is buying from their customer, they are able to subtract their overhead. By allowing the utility to recoup their overhead, the utility does not have to pass this cost down to ratepayers. You may hear testimony today that small-scale customer generation, especially from renewable sources, is good for the environment and therefore should be subsidized. I believe that is a separate policy issue. If the General Court wishes to require compensation to small-scale producers above wholesale prices, it should do so transparently and with explicit intent. The existing hidden cost methodology is convoluted and makes for bad policy. I urge you to support this legislation and add transparency and to reduce the electric rates for your constituents. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions from members of the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much. Next up, let's do Representative Mike Harrington. Testifying in support.
Thank you. I'm Representative Mike Harrington, Stratford District 3. There's been a lot of discussion on default service rates and what it means and what should be charged. This has been going on quite some time. So let's just give you just a slight bit of background on it. The first thing, what's the default service rate? Well, that's the rate that the utilities charge their customers who don't take a competitive supplier. Right now for Eversource, it's around 10 cents a kilowatt hour. So that's pretty simple and straightforward, but it gets a little bit more complicated when we start looking at how is that rate derived. And that's the part where I think there's some misunderstanding. So if you'll bear with me for a minute, I'll walk you through that process. The utility goes out and decides, okay, this is what we're looking forward to in the future. We don't generate any of our own electricity anymore, so we have to buy it from suppliers. They develop a load profile. They have to go forward and think, what's our load going to be? Is it going to be growth? Is it going to be loss? What's projections for temperature going to be over this time period? Is it going to be different? And putting that all together takes a lot of time and effort. Obviously, costs money. Let's say that cost goes into the utility cost bucket over here. Then they have to turn around and send that proposal out. And they send out an RFP, and they send it out to multiple suppliers. The suppliers look at that, and they decide whether or not they're interested. They have to go out and start doing investigations as far as who can supply the power to them at what cost if they were to enter into contracts. The big thing that you have to remember about that RFP is it's going to include a provision that says you shall comply with the demand for power at all times. So whoever takes that contract has an obligation to meet the demand of all the customers of the utility that they're contracted for. That, I've been told, is about 30% of the total cost for that supplier, because on a day where the temperature is lower than expected, there may be a different demand than expected. If it's hotter than normal in May, they're going to have to go out and get more power because of the air conditioning load goes up. They're going to have to pay more money for that. So having all this reserve factor, this uncertainty factor, costs about 30% of the total. So they develop all this contract. They put in that, obviously another factor they're going to put in, and that's going to be their profits, because they're not doing this. These are not non-profit organizations. They want to make money. So putting all that together, the risk factor, the buying the power, the profits, the cost of developing this, that'll be in the supplier cost bucket. So then the supplier sends that back to the utility, and the utility has to go through the process of reviewing these, maybe 2, 3, 4, multiple contracts. They review one and they just select, this is the best one. Okay, that review costs money. Put that in the utility cost bucket. Now you turn around and the utility then has to say, we're going to approve the contract with supplier A. We have to take that to the PUC for approval. That costs money. Put that in the PUC cost bucket. So now we have these two rather large cost buckets that make up the default service rate. That gets approved by the PUC, and it comes out at a particular rate. Now, what do we get from the intermittent suppliers who are net metered customers? Do they have any of these costs? Well, We'll start from the back and go the other direction. They don't have to bring anything to the PUC to be approved. So they have no contracts to approve, no lawyers to hire, nothing like that. They don't have to make a outside profit that's not from other than selling electricity. And the biggest thing is they have no risk premium because they have no obligation to supply electricity at any time. As a matter of fact, any one of these customers can go from whatever when the net metering maximum switches around depending on whether it's a municipality or private or whatever. But they can go from putting out the max to putting out nothing and being a customer that draws in power. So they could double almost the possibility of the demand on the grid instantaneously with no penalties. And so that's another cost that they don't have. So right now they're getting paid for those two buckets that I just went through for costs that they simply don't incur. So why should we be paying people for costs they don't incur? Well, it's a hidden subsidy, as the previous representative spoke. If the policy of the state of New Hampshire would be, we want to subsidize small solar units, for example, then let's put it out as a tax where everybody can see it and say this is a tax to subsidize solar units. I don't believe that's a good policy, but if we're going to go with that policy, that's the way it should be done. Right now we have this hidden tax built into the electric rates. Nobody knows they're paying it. The default service rate says nothing about this in there. And in fact, the more and more of these that we get, the more net metering customers we get with no obligation to provide electricity at any time and the ability to turn off their generator and become a consumer of electricity at any time, that's going to increase the risk factor. So actually, it's going to make the default service rate higher than it would be without them. So for that reason, I think we need to make these adjustments to the default service rate so we're not paying default service customers for costs they don't incur. Pretty simple. And I'll take any questions that you have.
Questions from members of the committee? Hearing none, thank you very much.
Well, you're very welcome.
Representative Oxenham, speaking in opposition.
I bet she's out in the hall.
Representative Sunset. No reps out there? Thank you. That's good news. Josh Elliott. Erstwhile member of this office,
Oh, staff anyway. I mean, I'm not a member. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, again, Josh Elliott from the Department of Energy. Department has no position on 1629 as before you. I would just in sort of in reviewing the bill, it would require the Public Utilities Commission to gather additional information beyond what is currently gathered. Let's see, I lost my place here. And just looking at the list of particular items that would be required to be backed out, ISO New England forward capacity markets would be potentially easy to back up, as well as the RPS costs, at least on a standardized format. Administrative costs, probably additional definition would be needed. The department has particular concerns with supplier profits, given that this would be the contract between the electric distribution utilities with their suppliers. I can't think of any person or any entity doing business that would voluntarily disclose or even legally required to disclose what their profit margin is on a particular product. You could make an argument about publicly traded companies being required in terms of their regular filings with FEC. SEC, different SEC. I don't know if that information is necessarily knowable. that they would, even if there was a legal requirement, I could see some resistance from the suppliers to actually providing that information. Again, being that they only sell one thing, for the most part, only sell one thing is the electricity that they generate. There could be potential issues with that. If the committee wishes to move forward with this legislation, the department would be happy to provide any technical expertise if there's a desire to sort of, essentially what is to boil down the net metering tariff to just the electricity supply portion of it, just literally just the cost of the electricity with all the other costs taken out. Sorry, I know I've rambled a bit, but I know you're on a short timeline here today.
Any questions for Josh? Are you saying essentially that you agree with the fact that there are costs being compensated that are not actually incurred by net meterers?
Well, no, those all go into the default service. So those are all costs that are incurred by the, I should say, that are all part of the package as Representative Harrington laid out of sort of the process that goes through in order to develop that default service rate. Those aren't necessary. I mean, it's the tariff is the tariff, but it's not necessarily. Those costs are part of the default service. Those are all baked in there. I mean, they're all just contained within the number. I'm sorry, I don't think I answered your question though.
You haven't?
No. Okay. In terms of whether or not those costs are actually incurred by folks who net meter in terms of that export, no, but the default, that rate was chosen by the PUC with the full knowledge that all of those items were included within the default service.
Okay, thank you. Questions further? Thank you, Josh.
Thank you.
Greg Moore in support but not speaking. Representative Vos.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to ask Representative McGee go first, if that's all right.
That's fine, sure.
I'm Representative McGee from Science, Technology, and Energy. Thanks for taking my testimony. As you've heard in the prior sets of testimony from 1599 and 1629, there's quite a bit of complexity involved in the rate setting process. And I actually have a letter that was submitted to a colleague of mine who was not able to stay for testimony on 1629. And it's from the president of Granite State Hydropower Association. And I just wanted to start by quoting a portion of this where he discusses a well-crafted letter of opposition that noted that the PUC is nearing the end of an expansive process of study of the value of distributed energy resources, which began in the summer of 2017. You've already heard of that on docket 576, excuse me. And the committee should be allowed to complete that process. And he goes on to say, for the past 4.5 years, PUC and various iterations of the DOE, when it was OEP, which is another acronym from prior days, staff and a diverse group of stakeholders have invested a significant amount of time and money, including the hiring of consultants, to undertake the appropriate research and analysis needed to better understand the value of distributed resources. He then concludes that Granite State Hydro Association believes it would be bad public policy to do an end run around the study process, which has been carefully designed and agreed to by a broad group of stakeholders. And he urges the committee to honor the agreement reached by all the stakeholders in DE 16-576 that allows the VDER study to be completed so that the decisions about fair and equitable net metering credits can take the study's findings into account. So I had just written here a couple of points I wanted to make. HB 1629 FN does an end run around that process that's ongoing at the PUC, which is designed to accurately set the value of distributed energy resources. And two, HB 1629 arbitrarily reduces the value of clean energy resources, which devalues existing facilities and discourages investment and small businesses from participating in the energy market as it currently exists. And both are outcomes that run counter to New Hampshire's interests, or at least to where we have been leading our policy in prior years. Of note, this bill also has a fiscal note, which I'm assuming relates to the economic losses that will be suffered by political subdivisions and others who are participating in the net metering market, and expect the state to be a consistent partner in that it may very well affect the tax reducing proposition of locally generated energy. Though the fiscal note says that when the Department of Energy completes their estimates, they will be provided. That process began a full 6 months ago, and yet there are still no estimates accompanying the bill. For these reasons, this bill is a solution in search of a problem. And in fact, rather than solving a problem, I think it creates one. So I would ask that you find HB 1629 FN inexpedient to legislate. And I'll be happy to take any questions. Thanks.
Any questions for Representative McGee? Hearing none.
Thank you.
Okay, Peter, come on up. David, hit the button on that mic. And you need to hit your button. All right, we're good to go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Peter Somsich, District 27, Rockingham. I come here to speak in opposition to 1629. This bill basically looks at one electron generating electricity and says that's the same as another electron generating electricity. However, the result that this bill has is to say it doesn't really matter where that electricity comes from, where that electron comes from. We're just going to ignore all the other attributes of that electron as it was generated, and we're just going to focus on the value of the one electron. Well, in fact, that's not a good way of looking at things, because as we know, when we're looking at energy fuels and energy sources, there are different ways of creating energy fuels and electricity. Some are more harmful than others, some are more efficient than others. And in this case, all those attributions are disregarded with this bill, and we strip it down just to the electrons, one versus another. Some of the attributes that I'm talking about, for example, are the fact that net metered renewable energy sources provide health benefits, environmental benefits, climate benefits, as well as in an in-state scenario that we have where all this renewable energy is generated in our state. It creates jobs, it creates economic activity, and all those things are being ignored if we just strip away all the benefits that are currently not being monetized in a way and don't reward that kind of energy. In addition, right now, considering the international issues around fuel volatility, renewable energy, net metered energy is a stable energy when it comes to pricing. That energy is priced at its stable price of $0. Once the installation is there, fuel prices is $0, is not impacted by fuel shortages or international conflicts, any of that. That's an attribute worth looking at, as well as it being an in-state resource and not something we need to import from other states and at a high cost or at volatile cost. As was mentioned before, the PUC is already looking at carefully evaluating the value of net metered energy and what benefits and the pros and cons of it. And that study should be coming out in late spring this year. And we should wait to see what that report says, because that will give us a good guideline of what's, how we can decide on these things. This bill, however, puts a brake on everything. Thank you. Okay.
Okay, questions from you, Senator?
Oh, sorry.
I'm good too. Thank you very much for your testimony.
Yep.
Representative Voss, we'll see if we can get you up here this time.
Thank you, Senator. For the record, Michael Vose, Representative Michael Vose from Rockingham District 9. Net metering is a public policy, and the public policy of our state is governed by the general court. Setting compensation for net metering, therefore, is well within the purview of the general court. And House Bill 1629 gives guidance to the Public Utilities Commission as it does its work to establish a new net metering tariff. You could think of HB 1629 very similar to HB 549, which we passed earlier this year and which was signed into law by the governor. That bill put guardrails on the system benefits charge to make sure that it could continue to operate and grow, but that it wouldn't grow too fast and have the result of dramatically increasing our electricity costs. This bill, by defining default service for net metering in legislation, similarly puts guardrails on the growth of the net metering business or the net metering costs that would be incurred by electricity ratepayers. If that guardrail was in place, it would be much easier to expand net metering because we could be assured that the costs wouldn't get out of control. Similarly, this bill comports more closely with PURPA. And PURPA back in 1978 had this to say about net metering. When power produced exceeds the power consumed, those rates paid shall not exceed avoided costs. It then goes on to define avoided costs as, quote, the cost to the electric utility of the electric energy, which, but for the purchase from such cogenerator or small power producer, such utility would generate or purchase from another source. That's the intent of the federal legislation that was passed to encourage the development of renewable energy. And HB 1629 brings us more in line with PURPA than what we have in existence today.
Okay.
I would also refer you to
Wrap it up if you would, please.
Okay. Just quickly, I'd refer you to the graphic that I sent with my written testimony, which shows a breakdown of default service. And if you look at it carefully, you'll see that the biggest part of default service is the electrical energy, but there are many other component parts. And while a utility has to pay for those non-energy services, a customer generator really doesn't need to. So with that, I'll conclude my testimony and accept any questions if you have any.
Senator, do you have any questions?
Yeah, just one. You heard Josh Elliott talk about the disclosure of profits. Any thoughts about that?
Thoughts about it? Well, the Public Utilities Commission discusses private proprietary information with utilities all the time. That happens routinely in rate cases. Is that what your question was?
I guess I think that there was some concern about the categories there and whether they're sufficiently defined, and that process for disclosing those profits and setting these rates was what he raised. So that's why I wanted to ask.
I see your point, and the important language to pay attention to there, I forget exactly what line it's on, but it's near the end of the new text being added by the legislation. And that new text, the last line says, as determined by the commission. So it will still be up to the commission to determine exactly what components get excluded from net metering compensation.
Thank you. I'll have to check on that. Without a comma after components, I'm not sure whether that phrase refers back prior to anything previous to the previous comma. So beats me. I'll check it out. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Seeing no other questions, thank you very much. Clean energy, Sam.
I think, so thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members of the committee. I think I'd just like to take a moment to maybe zoom out ever so slightly. This debate is really about a rapidly changing energy system, one in which there are markets that were designed for very large generators that are now being disrupted by new technologies that have fallen in cost dramatically. So I have a lot of friends who are interested in going solar, and because of my line of work, they approach me and ask me to evaluate the quotes they're given by solar companies. And regularly, I'm seeing costs of installed residential solar in the neighborhood of 6 to 8 cents per kilowatt hour. And when your utility is charging you 27 cents a kilowatt hour, as Unitil is, that's a pretty attractive value proposition. And so I would just point out to the committee that a policy like the one that you're considering right now with this bill, there's a certain risk to it, which is that as the cost of these technologies of distributed renewable energy resources continue to come down, there's going to be substantial incentive for customers to try to access these technologies, even if the state does not have a policy framework that makes it possible for them to do so. And the way that they will do that is by installing storage technology, devices in their homes and cutting the cord to the grid. And we're not far off from a point in which that will become economic for residents. And that's the risk, because that's where you get into a very scary situation in which, that our cable TV providers have confronted lately, in which you actually do have a genuine death spiral on your hands. So I would argue that what the state should be thinking about doing is how to more intelligently approach the design of the net metering tariff, as opposed to how to cut it back to the bone so that it's just at the wholesale rate. There are lots of reasons why the wholesale rate is not the right rate for a net metered project. Net metered projects are not able to bid into all of the various regional markets that large-scale generators can bid into in order to make their value proposition. Those are markets that are currently not accessible to these small generators, in part because of the various overlapping jurisdictions, such as the ISO New England, such as the FERC, et cetera. So I would say that a go slow, iterative approach to tariff design is the right approach, and that this approach goes a little too fast and is a little too heavy-handed and has substantial risks.
Thank you. Question, Senator.
Thanks for your testimony. So we heard a little earlier testimony about the potential fiscal note, which would potentially outline the effects of this bill of reducing revenues for municipalities. Is that the way you see it as well?
I missed 2 words at the beginning of the
Yeah, I mean, we heard that one of the fiscal note potentially would be addressing the possible loss of revenues, or the loss, I call it revenues, what do you want to call it, but the loss of money to municipalities who have been getting this rate based on the current formula.
Right. So as it stands, there are many projects, and Heidi Kroll, who I perhaps is signed up to speak.
Next.
Yeah, she can address this more granularly, because I think a lot of those generators are in fact hydro facilities, and so indeed, communities are benefiting from this tariff right now, and would see their revenues cut, and they would see their abilities to reduce the property tax burden for their citizens cut as well. These are all considerations that I would hope this body is taking into consideration.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions, Heidi?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Heidi Kroll. I work at Gallagher, Callahan, and Gartrell, and I represent the Granite State Hydropower Association and also Monadnock Paper Mills. We are strongly opposed to House Bill 1629. I'm handing out testimony. A few things I'd like to say. First of all, the debate and arguments that you've heard from prior speakers who are in support of this bill are the exact arguments that the PUC heard back in 2015 and 2016 along with arguments from folks on the other end of the spectrum who are arguing that the compensation for net metered power should be something above the default service rate. And that's exactly why we have the value of distributed energy resource study that's been going on now for 5 years, which is trying to answer the questions about which side has valid points and how does that all shake out. So we would strongly urge you to find this bill inexpedient to legislate and let the PUC process play out. I'd also like to say Representative Vos, Chairman Vos, indicated that this would put some guardrails around net metering. I'd like to say that at least from the group net metering perspective, this would kill group net metering. By giving, I'll explain very briefly, in group net metering, there's a generator, the host, and a group of customers. And those group of customers are paying another generator or the utility, and they're paying a default service rate. And what happens is behind the scenes, the host cuts a check to the group members that effectively brings down their purchase price of power below a default service, which is just kind of the mark to beat, if you will. And so if the generator is only getting a wholesale price, which is what this bill amounts to, for their excess generation, there's nothing left for them to give back to the group. So House Bill 315, which was passed last year, would be meaningless if this bill were to pass. And I'm happy to answer any questions. I know we're on a time limit.
Questions from the senators? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
That's the end of our list. Close the public hearing, and Senator Guida will open the public hearing on 1187 and
So ordered. Oh, wait a minute. And let's see, we'll recognize the sponsor here. Well,
not seeing the sponsor.
You want to speak to
Mr. Chair, I would introduce House Bill 1187 relative to milk pasteurization.
Get to the bill.
How we got that, I'm waiting to see.
Natural resources, right?
Just call them the witnesses.
Yeah, let's get to the bill here. All right, is Representative Lekas here? Is Jennifer Smith here? Not speaking. Okay, welcome.
Thank you, members of the committee, Mr. Chairman. I did not put down whether I'm opposed to this. I saw a bill a couple of years ago that was similar, and I did oppose it. I have not had a chance to really go through this with people at the Department of Health and Human Services or my own association, New Hampshire Public Health Association. I have substantial concerns. Maybe they could be allayed, but this is, as was noted by Senator Gray, this may be the wrong committee. And I don't know if there's a process for vacating this or just sending it to a second committee. But the reason that I have concerns is that ice cream and frozen yogurt are substantially different than aged cheese, yogurt, cream, and butter in that they are extremely attractive to young children. And young children are far more susceptible to serious gastrointestinal bugs. And that's the whole purpose of milk pasteurization, is to prevent people whose gastrointestinal systems aren't going to be immune competent from getting seriously ill. And very small children can die from diarrhea, as you may well know. It's still one of the leading causes around the world, although we have such a good healthcare system. It's rare in this country, but it's still something that is not something you want to see as a clinician, to hospitalize a small child because we didn't pasteurize the milk that went into their ice cream. And by the way, ice cream, unlike butter and cream, is going to contain a substantial portion of fluid, part of milk, which is where bacteria tend to reside most. So I think the law as it was is good, and I don't think this is a good expansion, but maybe I could be persuaded, but I'm dubious about it, and I think it really should go to Health Committee.
Thank you, and I think I'll note for the record that Jennifer is an MD, is a
Yes.
doctor, so not speaking as just a
MD,
nurse.
MPH,
Right.
Master of Public Health.
Master of Public Health. Thank you. Any questions for Dr. Smith? Hearing none, and seeing no other people to testify. Anyone in the audience who has and wishes to on this bill? All right, we'll close the hearing on House Bill 1187. And we will open the hearing on House Bill 241. And Senator Waters would be very happy to introduce the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to introduce Senator Waters before introducing House Bill 241, repealing the definition of brook trout. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Something fishy here.
I'm fishing for compliments.
All right, so thank you for.
Don't laugh at him, it just encourages it. Come on.
Is that bad? All right, so we'll recognize the only person signed up to speak, and that's in support. It's Diane Timmons from Fish and Game. Thank you for coming today, Diane.
Hello. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Diane Timmons. I am the Inland Fisheries Division Chief for New Hampshire Fish and Game. We support House Bill 241 as amended. We have initiated internal discussions on the need to simplify our fisheries administrative rules, and this would enable us to do that. We are in the process of working on rewriting and cleaning up section FIS 400, which pertains to this definition. And we are doing that in an effort to avoid ambiguity that currently exists, as well as that will enable us to, well, not enable us, I apologize. During that process, we will be creating definitions as well as better written rules to avoid confusion with our general public. So, and this bill enables us to do that as amended, like I mentioned. And so in closing, New Hampshire Fish and Game supports House Bill 241 as amended.
Thank you very much. Any questions from members of the committee?
Yeah.
Senator Waters.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you. So I had two questions. One is, by repealing this, do we affect at all the status of the brook trout as the state of New Hampshire fish?
No, and right now, because our FIS rules actually have a definition in them, that's something that we looked up, because of course if this went away and there were no other rules, it would be really crazy. But so we do actually have the definition in our administrative rules, so it really doesn't impact anything.
Okay, thanks. And I mean, I know in the statutory language there is a particular species definition there, which may be more restrictive than the one that's included in the passage being repealed. I have one other question, if I may. So I don't have the complete citation, but somewhere in RSA 11, there's reference to netting of minnows and saying that netting of minnows is okay, but not where there is the presence of brook trout. And there it would be more inclusive of the rainbow, the other char species that are included. So I'm curious as to whether repealing this then would undermine that statutory protection of these fish when it comes to netting minnows.
So not being that person, I have no idea as far as that goes, but I believe that's under our rules for baiting. Is that, so in that there is a definition, I believe also there, that states the more protective restrictions regarding trout as well in our own FISs. I don't know it off the top of my head, but I can definitely look into that as well. So I would think same thing. It would bounce back to the FISs and be able to reference the protections there. I'm not positive. I'm definitely
Thank you. And
not that
I think it'd
person.
be very helpful because what I'm concerned about is if you lose the, I mean, yes, I understand FIS, but if you
Yep.
lose the definition, maybe you're also lost the rules on that one.
We
Okay.
did, yeah, that's a good question. And we did speak with Attorney General Chris Aslan this morning, actually regarding that, because we were a little, not that particular one, but with the 400s, because of course that's every bit of our management strategy. And so that's a big deal. And spoken multiple times throughout the 400s for brook trout. And he had mentioned that it shouldn't impact it. So as it's written, because we have the definition of it in our FISs. So I'm not sure about yours. So that was RSA 11.
So please just check. It's RSA 11 something.
Oh, okay.
But it's about minnows.
Yep.
And where they can be netted or not.
Yeah.
And
Nope.
there's a protection there for brook trout.
Right.
Specifically.
Yep. Nope. I will definitely do that. Absolutely. Thank you.
All right, Senator Avard's recognized to speak. This is the last witness on Senate Bill, I'm sorry, House Bill 241.
All right.
So we will close the hearing on that.
I leave and things have run more efficiently.
Yeah, you missed his joke and everything. You did very well.
I leave this in the hands of a Marine, right? Yeah, take the hill, go. So the trout are okay?
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm glad we had this talk. All right.
Thank you, guys.
Is this, oh. Shalom. Wow. Wow. What'd you do?
Couldn't have done it without you.
I think you just did.
So how to go over there? To the committee.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think the waste. Oh, I think